Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to this Seatrade Maritime virtual conference. To introduce our panel and guide us through the next 60 minutes of discussion, please welcome your moderator for this session, founder and managing director of Etas, Nick Chubb.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for joining us on this Seatrade ShipTech Middle East webinar, looking at the rapid adoption of digital technologies and the decade ahead. As the world has battled to control a pandemic through 2020, we've heard countless times that the virus that has put half of the global population on lockdown has accelerated digitalization across all industries. Anecdotal evidence suggests that in the maritime industry, the pandemic has created a flurry of spending on digital services that make it possible to keep critical operations running while the world deals with the various lockdown measures that exist. But it has also put the brakes on many of the more strategic transformation projects going on across the industry. As we begin to look ahead to 2021, the arrival of various vaccines may signal a gradual return to normality. But waves of disruption always leave behind permanent change when they eventually recede. To explore how COVID-19 has impacted maritime digitalization today and how the accelerated adoption of digital tools will impact the industry tomorrow, we have brought together a panel of industry leaders, including technologists, ship owners, and investors. In this session, I will be joined by Mark Dragon, the Managing Director of Reef Knot Investments, a Singapore-based venture capital fund focused on emerging supply chain technologies. Mike Konstantinidis, the co-founder and CEO of Etas Cyberspace Technology, an Athens-based startup that builds vessel optimization technology. Inga Sandvik, the Chief Digital Officer at Wilhelmsen Group, a world-leading maritime services group that includes shipping and port agency services. And Chris Vedat, Head of Information Technology at P&O Maritime Logistics, a leading ship owner in the offshore logistics space. And of course, you. We'd love you to take part in the discussion today. This is very much an interactive event. There's no slides, no PowerPoint. We're jumping straight into the discussion. So use the chat box that you can see there to answer questions, make comments. If you disagree with us, if you agree with us, let us know. If you type the questions into that area, the team will get them over to me, and I'll do my best to weave them into the conversation with our esteemed panel. So I think it's always better if panelists give a proper introduction of themselves. So first off, thank you all for joining me. What I'd like to do is kick off by asking you to introduce yourself and answer this one question. Has COVID-19 accelerated the adoption of digital tools across your business and the industry? Chris, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Nick. I'd like to say thanks for the opportunity to speak today on this panel. So yes, my name is Chris Vedat. I'm the Head of IT at P&O Maritime Logistics, a logistic operator working in three main verticals: offshore, port services, and logistics. So to get straight to your question, do I think that COVID has accelerated digital initiatives? I think it has. I think the need now to have more remote abilities to certainly do certain tasks that are done by human interaction has certainly increased. A good example, I think, would be the classification societies. So obviously class surveys and that are much more difficult to do in COVID now with travel restrictions. So things like remote class surveys are things that are being explored in more detail now. We have certainly been seeing that trend moving forward, and we've worked with the classification societies such as ABS to try and improve this process. But I also think there's a lot more that can be done in this area. If we stick with the classification society, I think data and the use of data to drive the class process is something that is probably not been taken a great deal of opportunity at the moment. I think if we look at the amount of data that we can gather from the various pieces of equipment, that will enable us to perform the class surveys in a far more remote manner and a less intrusive perspective for surveyors to come on board. I think from an operator's perspective, I think certainly in the offshore industries, the oil price as it is has presented very difficult trading conditions. And so some of the initiatives that we would probably like to have seen or seen in the industry hasn't probably taken place because there's an element of cautiousness still when the recovery will come, how quickly it will come. I think in our instance in P&O, we already embarked on a digital journey several years ago. So when we came to the situation with COVID and the ability to access the vessels became far more restricted, we were able to already utilize the technologies that we'd already implemented and digital initiatives we already put in place in order to better to perform the tasks that we were performing on site remotely. So we've managed to perform still management vessel visits using Teams because we put in place an infrastructure on board with VSATs and good communication links to facilitate this. We're still performing remote surveys now with ABS, for example. We're working with ABS to actually take data from the vessels to actually perform survey credits, to have survey credits for our class survey. So I think these initiatives enabled us before to be able to take advantage of this, but I still think there's a fair bit to do moving forward.
Thank you, Chris. And I think that whole area of enabling services for the ship, like management surveys, audits, all that sort of thing, is really important. I'd like to come back and unpack that a little bit more later on. But for now, we'll move on to Mike. Mike, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how COVID-19 has affected adoption from your point of view?
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. I would like to say, first of all, to answer your question is exactly what we are currently right now doing right here is the biggest proof that digital tools are actually enabling us to be more operational, resilient, of course, addressing this huge curse that we are all facing worldwide. So absolutely, yes, digital technologies, it's more popular than ever, that are enabling us to be much more efficient than before, and this is something that was really embraced by the whole universe. My name is Mike Konstantinidis. I'm the CEO of Metis Cyberspace Technology. We are specializing in data acquisition, real-time performance monitoring, and intelligent analytics for the maritime industry, based and powered by advanced machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques. We are based in Athens. We do have clientele all over the globe. The core of Metis and our team of skilled engineers and researchers whose innovative thinking, maritime business know-how, and expertise in high-end technologies are empowering the shipping industry into the digital transformation journey. And I would say that the best is yet to come for the industry. It's a game-changing era, which actually changes the business model of this business activity.
Thank you, Mike. Best is yet to come. That's an interesting take. I like that. Inge, if I could ask you to go next and introduce yourself and talk a bit about how COVID has affected Wilhelmsen.
Yeah, thanks, and happy to be here and joining you guys. Inge Sandvik, I joined Wilhelmsen 4 years ago, no background from the shipping or maritime industry at all, working in tech and consulting companies, and been a startup CEO for 4 venture-backed companies. So I kind of have a mixed background, seeing it from different type of industries, and it's been exciting 4 years. And the reason why I joined Wilhelmsen is that Wilhelmsen was most known for being the world's largest ro-ro shipping operator, but the most exciting thing is that we are also the world's largest maritime network, and deliver products and services to more than half of the world's merchant fleet. So I kind of looked at it as Wilhelmsen is a kind of a maritime Amazon, an everything shop delivering all type of services and products, and are moving now and accelerating by COVID into more digital products and services, moving away from transaction-oriented business models to more service-oriented business models. And I think that the investment we have done in the last years that hasn't been properly utilized and adopted especially on the cloud technologies, has been really accelerated and fast-paced with COVID. So of course it's a disaster for everyone, but for all of us that are working in this digital transformation space, it's been some sort of I wouldn't say a blessing, but it has for sure accelerated this process. And I think that people that were a bit reluctant to adopt now see that they have the tools. We are putting in a lot of investment in further developing new technologies, and we see, of course, the industry, the tech industry, all industries are now pouring a lot of money into kind of filling the gaps that are there, and I see that this new wave of sustainability as well, that we need to develop new solutions to cope with the sustainability goals, is also kind of a force in terms of accelerating this.
Thank you. That's a fantastic point, and I think I'd really like to come back to the sustainability issue as well, because obviously we're dealing with COVID this year, but we look out to 2030 and beyond. Sustainability it will continue to be a massive issue. And last but by no means least, Mark, I've asked you to go last simply because you take more of a wide view of all of this, looking at the supply chain outside of the maritime industry as well. So please go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about ReefNot, and then just let us know how you see COVID affecting digitalization in maritime and the supply chain.
Right. Firstly, thanks, Nick, for inviting me to this session, and hi, fellow panelists and everyone else out there. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. So ReefNot, we are a global supply chain logistics technology venture capital firm. A mouthful. We are situated out of Singapore. Two major investors into the fund, which is Temasek as well as Kunanago. And we were born early last year. So it was interesting because when the fund was conceptualized, there were three general areas where we were looking to focus on. The first area was in AI and deep tech, right? Think predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, that kind of planning, optimization, those kind of technologies, and data science, data management, etc. The second area was in logistics digitization, right? Automation, think RPA, think document automation, and things that would enable smoother flows within the chain. And the third area was the area of trade finance, right? Not only supply chain financing, working capital financing, inventory financing. So that was last year. And lo and behold, COVID struck right early this year. The moment COVID struck, we did a snap survey of corporates and supply chain leaders across the world. And this is what we found out, right? There were basically still hold. Those three areas were still areas that companies and corporates were looking at. But there was a greater focus on three general areas. The first one was visibility, right? Supply chain visibility, and more importantly, dynamic and more real-time visibility. The second area was in the area of resilience, right? And resilience is not so much a very broad word in terms of risk management, stuff like that, but the resilience that the corporates alluded to us was more around managing of resources and assets, given the variable nature of demand and capacity changes that were happening so dynamically, right? And that's still relevant now, even with the vaccines coming out. And the third area that was very important was in the area of working capital financing, right? If you all would remember back in first quarter this year, the moment COVID hit, most organizations just took a step back, made sure they had enough cash, to last the next X of years or months, right, before committing on new initiatives moving forward. So on the COVID, those three things happened, and we saw, and through the past 6 to 9 months, we saw a K-shaped kind of a curve and recovery, right? There's a tailwind on some certain types of technologies and startups with those technologies. Think, predictive analytics, right? Think supply chain real-time visibility, right? Where your goods are, what's going on, and all these became more important now than it was previously, right? Even in the area of logistics digitization, right, or digital logistics, where previously I might have had a few 3PLs, for example, that I would have leaned to predominantly to move my goods. Subsequently, it's like, oh, these guys might not have the capacity that I need, so I need to have other sources where I would then contract out, and that's where the digital logistics folks started emerging very rapidly as well, right? And finally, those firms that used AI to facilitate working capital chain financing, definitely have a tailwind to them as well over the past 6 to 9 months.
Thank you, Mark. I think of those three areas, visibility, resilience, and working capital, the one that's most interesting to me to sort of dive into as a kickoff point is resilience. And I'd be interested to bring in Chris here and just talk. Chris, could you perhaps just tell us a little bit about from P&O Maritime's perspective? You have been quite forward-leaning in terms of the adoption of digital tools before 2020, which put you in quite a good position to remain resilient throughout 2020. But perhaps could you just tell the audience a little bit about how you kind of see those tools enabling resilience in the organization?
I think the tools that are in place to enable resilience from several factors. I think it provides transparency from the offshore to the shore side. When we talk about data, has been mentioned about data being driven or driving a lot of decisions. I think when we looked at the challenges that we have on board the vessel and as an organisation, we made sure that there was the right tools in place in order to provide solutions to those challenges. And I think one of the big subject matters that need to be tackled is that I think within COVID and 2020, a lot of people started embarking upon digital initiatives, but there's a danger to embark on digital initiatives for the wrong reason. And I think you still need to have a very strong business case attached to any initiative that you embark upon. Which is why when we started our digital journey, there was a business case document, a digital business case document put together that identified several areas within the business that we wanted to target and focus on, and then looked at the various KPIs and what we wanted to achieve, and then picked the enabling technologies for that solution. And I think one of the things that I've seen in COVID is that there's been a rush to adopt digitization, but that's maybe not the right digital tool been implemented in order to solve that problem. So I think it's key to understand that any digital initiative that's embarked upon has a strong business case attached to it and has obviously business buy-in as well. Thereafter, it's obviously going through the various steps of implementation to get those digital tools in place and tracking the value that you're getting from that digital initiative and that digital tool. That's when the resilience comes into it. So because you've already built that business case in place, you already have the trackable KPIs associated to that, you already have the business buy-in, so then the resilience is enabled thereafter. I think one also good point as well is that with the digital initiatives in place, you're able to start tracking more data, you're able to then get better value from that data and make better business decisions. And obviously with COVID in place, that enables that resilience there as well.
I think that point on making better business decisions is a really key one. I think perhaps prior to this year, there's been a lot of adopting digital tools, but not necessarily taking a genuinely data-driven approach to decision making across a fleet, perhaps. Mike, it'd be interesting to get your take on that, because that's something you've been working hand in hand with ship owners to do over the last few years that you've been running Metis. How do you go about helping masters, fleet managers, surveyors make better data-driven decisions?
Yes, you're right, Nick. Thank you very much for the insightful question. I would like to mention a recent statement by Klaus Schwab, the founder of World Economic Forum at Davos. He said, "The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world." I think I couldn't agree more than this statement. I think this is a great opportunity. And as far as I see in the market, in the maritime sector worldwide, no matter if we are talking to shipping companies based in Singapore or in Northern Europe or in Vancouver, the other side of the globe, we see, and every day we see more and more shipping executives of leading companies that are realizing that if they do not embrace as soon as possible the digitalization process, this digital transformation of their own organizations, they will be left aside, and they will probably run the risk of losing the opportunity to be competitive in the new era. We see, and this is a very positive trend, and we see more and more organizations, since shipping, as we all know, is an old school business activity with a huge history. A large part of it is family run business, or traditionally based on empirical methods and rules of thumb, for example. So we see that they are realizing that the digitalization is a necessity. It's a digital wave which is already here, so you can't avoid it, but you definitely need to be able to ride it, to be able to know how to utilize it, how to leverage all this huge data flow into actionable information that will enable you to be data-driven, real data-driven decision making.
And Inga, if I can bring you in on 2 points there, one made by Chris earlier about the business case, and the second by Mike about ensuring that you're able to sort of ride this wave and make the right kind of decisions. You're an organization that's obviously put a huge amount of investment and resources into digital transformation, and even have invested in building open source tools for the sector that perhaps immediately wouldn't see a direct ROI. What's the process you use internally at Wilhelmsen to build those business cases, and then how do you ensure that everyone in the organization is on board with it?
Yeah, great question. And I think that the situation we have now in the industry is that, or when I joined, I heard that, oh, we're such a traditional and conservative industry. But when you kind of dive into it, you see that people are willing to change and to adopt if they are given the opportunity. And I think that the organizational model, moving more towards a more functional organization where experts leads experts, and where you have autonomous teams and new work methods, is something that people will embrace and adopt to much quicker than we believe. And the other part is that we need a new architecture for the industry. We have in the merchant fleet 60,000 ships and 60,000 platforms. If you compare it to the telco industry or the tech industry, especially on mobile, you have 6 billion phones and 2 platforms. So you need a different type of architecture that enable innovation much faster, and continuous improvement of these services, driven, of course, by data, but as mentioned before, really focus on the big problems and the problems that have a solid or a good business case, where we see that we can invest but not take huge risks. We can move much quicker in smaller steps, and as we know, big changes starts in small steps. And I think that is kind of the situation we have now, that we are willing to adopt much quicker than we believe. We're not that as conservative as we think we are, and we are willing to invest because it's not needed to do those large investments to make impact. The end of the big projects are gone. The big ERP implementations are history. Yeah.
Mark, I can see you nodding there, and obviously I'm thinking of you as a venture investor, but also someone who looks at the wider software landscape quite a lot. How do you see software changing in maritime and in the supply chain? Are we moving away from big projects, and if so, where are we going to?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. So if you decompose the supply chain into the carriers, the asset base, the value-added services on top of that, the traditional forwarder business, and of course the shipper community, right? And then if you layer on what I mentioned before, the K-shaped recovery, the have and the have-nots, and if you layer on even more over that, the whole, how is digitization impacting this, right? And you get some semblance of the answer, because you will see that in the carrier space, for example, those who have adopted digital technologies, like what Chris mentioned, it might have been done beforehand or planned beforehand, but the more rich you are in terms of understanding how to leverage and utilize data, be it data management or prediction and analytics, right? The further ahead of the curve you are at, and COVID just accelerated it, right? And going back to Inga's point, it doesn't necessarily need to be one big bang project, right? Multi-year project to get things done. In fact, now, having smaller kind of initiatives that proves value and returns value rapidly, and using that investment to roll, I think that is something that the industry has started to learn how to do, right? But again, digitization is definitely impacting the industry in different ways. Carriers or forwarders, each one of them, again, you need to have a digitized plan moving ahead. And what COVID has done is that it has sort of revealed the gaps in industry capabilities as well as individual company capabilities as well. And I think that gives a huge opportunity to smaller and more innovative technology-centric firms to come in and plug those gaps.
And Mike, I would say you're a perfect example of one of those, a small, innovative, technology-centric firm. As you go out and speak to industry, speak to your clients, what are some of those gaps that you're seeing that need to be filled, and how are you going about closing them?
Yes, thank you, Nick. I think Mark mentioned it very successfully. It's not a question of huge investment. The point here for the shipping industry is to be able to take some steps, as was correctly put in. The steps are given and need to be followed irrespective of the criticality of the situation. We definitely feel that data is the king in this era that we are living. The financial people know that the cash was always have been the king, but now we all, I think, agree that the cash may be the queen, but data is the king in our era. So it is important to ensure that you do have reliable, frequent data flow from the vessels themselves. You need to be able to have actual and continuous data from the various critical devices and equipment on board the vessels. And then you need to be able to enrich this collected data with third-party data, with weather data, and with other manually taken data, even if fragmentary, yet they are important to be taken into account. Then you need to be able to synchronize, to clean, and to store properly in a reliable way, and then starts the next stage of this extremely important procedure, which is to employ an advanced analytics in order to convert, to change this raw data into intelligent information. And of course, there, the power that augments all this effort is artificial intelligence, which is a sexy buzzword, but the real revolution behind it is the huge disruption caused by the machine learning technology. The machine learning is the technology that changes the world as we know it and we experience it. And in shipping, which, as I said, is still being managed by traditional ways, those results sound like rocket science for most of the managers, and they realize that this is the way that the business model, the whole business model, is being changed. There are very specific and exciting examples of how this gives them actionable and quantifiable results, which cost money, and the investment is ridiculous because this industry is very familiar with the investments, so this is nothing for them. In digitalization and in digital technologies, it's the know-how that makes a difference. It's not the amount invested. It's other way of evaluating things.
Chris, I want to bring you in here because Mike mentioned two things there that I think were quite interesting to me. One is you need a reliable and frequent data flow from the vessels, and then two, you need to layer that on top with advanced analytics and potentially go as far as artificial intelligence to help with that, to get insight back. But I think one of the big stumbling blocks we always have in the industry is that first question of just sharing data with third parties. And once you get the data off the vessel, how do you share it so that you can run the advanced analytics? And I know that P&O Maritime's taken a bit of a leading position in terms of sharing data. And I think it would be good if perhaps you could unpack that a little bit and talk about your process and what you've developed for the sector.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think that's a very good point. I think there's a couple of very good points in that discussion. I think first of all is how do you get the data off the vessels, which is always a challenge. I mean, vessels work with satellite communications, which can be unreliable at times. So there needs to be an architecture in place to be able to support such a methodology. And let's not forget that although we're trying to get the data off the vessels to do analytics on it, but it's also important to remember that the data is also there being used for the vessel and the crew. So we need to have a solution in place that enables the crew to be able to make decisions and take actions based on the data that's being generated on the vessels, and for that data then to be processed offline, onshore, to do more of the predictive analytics work that's in place there. So that needs to be looked at in any solution. If we talk about data sharing and data collaboration, I think traditionally the maritime industry has been very bad at sharing data. I think it's operated in silos. It's not like to share. This is my data and I don't want to share this data. Yes, data is a commodity, but my personal opinion is that the data isn't, isn't really the commodity. What you do with the data is the added value. You can share data. I've got no issue sharing the data, but it's then what you do with the data is your unique selling point. So at P&O Maritime Logistics, we created something called maritimestats.com, which was designed to be an open source platform for the maritime industry to collaborate and share data. I think historically, if we look at, let's take one example, the engine data, for example, so look at maintenance data. So historically, the OEMs have been very good at saying they have condition-based maintenance systems and predictive-based maintenance systems because they have all the data that's available to be able to trend it and to perform the analytics on. But we as operators also have that data. So why does it not make sense to share that operational data with everyone? Then you can then use a greater data section to perform more accurate analytics on. So I have a certain section of data or a certain amount of data, which is fine. But the more data you gather, the more accurate analytics becomes. So if we as operators share our data, we're able to all perform better analytics moving forward. Maintenance data is one sector. But what about safety data? So does it make sense to share safety data with all the operators? Why would it not make sense to have a safer operating environment for all vessels and crew? There's nothing, that's not a unique selling point for us to be more competitive commercially. It's just ensuring that our seafarers operate more safely. What's the most commonly injured part on a body? What time is the most injuries occur at, or the incidents occur at? If we look at a greater data sphere, then we get a better predictive analytic model. So I'm a true believer that we should share data, collaborate more freely with each other, and we've certainly been trying to strive forward with that.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, and I think there's been a long-standing belief in the industry that we don't compete on safety, and I think actually we're getting to the point now where really we should be looking at how do we extract safety data and share it in a way that it is not commercially sensitive, and taking that one step further when you see the benefits is looking at actually what commercial data can be shared to improve efficiency across the whole sector. We've got about 22 minutes left, and so I'm going to start opening up to audience questions, of which there are a few coming in. Do keep them coming. We'll do our best to get through as many as possible. For the first one, Inga, I'd like to start off with you. You've mentioned sort of business model transformation a little bit, moving from transaction-based model to a service-based model. Mike, you've talked about something similar, and we've talked about going from big projects to small changes. There's a question here from Graham Harker that says, should suppliers of software solutions just be more agile, flexible, and have subscription models that are pay-as-you-go rather than CapEx up front? Would this better support projects and rapid adoption of digital solutions that add value? Inga, what's your take on that as an operator, but also as a technologist?
The short answer is yes. I think that we have when we look at kind of the customer obsession dimension, how can we if we focus on the value of the customer, we very often see that there is no need for upfront investment when we can deliver a product and service in a way that that fits the need for the customer when they need it. So to put it in a kind of a context and an example, we have a rope factory in Wilhelmsen, and we're delivering ropes to a lot of ships around the world. And but ships don't really need ropes; they need safe mooring. So why are we not selling safe mooring instead? And ropes could be part of it. So we put sensors inside of the rope. So we could have said it's a smart rope, but we are more focusing on the safe mooring. So we put together the sensors, the applications that is needed to enable that the ship has a safe mooring. So the operator or the manager or whoever, they don't really need to buy the rope itself. They buy the safe mooring, and we will provide them with the products that is needed to do that safe mooring. And when we started that journey, we saw that there is no application platform on board a ship. There are, as I said, 60,000 platforms. And when we develop modern software, we kind of want to develop it in the way that we develop it for a cloud in a containerized environment. But there is no runtime to put it on board. And if everyone that is developing these type of smart solutions is going to deliver a full stack solution with both edge devices and sensors and everything, the ships would, the architecture and the infrastructure, it will just be too complex and not sustainable enough in terms of operating it. So there is a very clear need to have this maritime application platform, and I really liked, Chris, what you said about open source. I think that in this endeavor of creating this environment or this new ecosystem where we're either sharing data, and I also want to make a point there, data, we kind of solve access to data. The big problem right now is quality of data and how we ensure how it could be used to be properly analyzed or utilized either on board or on shore in cloud. So a long answer, but if we're going to answer the question around the services, or from Graham Harker here, if we have new digital solutions that can be more subscription and more OpEx oriented, we also need this new platform or this new architecture that enable us to quickly build these services and also continuously improving it.
And Mike, as someone who sells to ship owners, are you seeing demand for more OpEx focused subscription based services, or is it still a case of we'd like to pay up front for the kit or whatever it may be?
Thank you, Nick. Digitalization has nothing to do with actually no capex or very low capex. Digitalization is merely OpEx, and this is the trend, and this is really makes sense because you need to be able to see how those tools, those services offered are fitting your business, are matching your requirements, are addressing your needs, and are value adding for your business. We at Etas, one of the design principles of a solution was to be able to offer no upfront investment or any capex if possible, and offer all the value-adding services as a service and with monthly recurring revenue. So the customers are more than happy because they don't need to be engaged, they don't need to be binded with long-term obligations. They are happy to enjoy the services and pay them as much as they enjoy it. And this is the best practice. This is exactly what digitalization is about. And this is a very fair deal with any of our customers because they are able to stop it whenever they think it's not of value to them. This is what the digitalization is about. And thank you very much for the gentleman that asked this question, because this is really very insightful and creative discussion.
I guess that creates a much more shared risk between ship owner operator and the software provider.
Totally.
We've had a question from Reverend Canon Andy Bowerman, who I assume is a port chaplain based on the question. Chris, I'd like to pass this one to you. Data is king, cash is queen, but the seafarer is always the trump card. How can we use digital technology to improve the well-being of seafarers who often lead isolated lives? And how do we help cadets and those entering the industry now to be better prepared for the decade ahead? Which opens up a whole other range of questions on skills. But we'll start with that question, Chris.
So I think, as I said before, I think when we talk about the data, it's important to get the data off the vessel, but it's also important to ensure that the data that's being collected is actually improving the processes on board the vessels, so that enable the seafarers to make better decisions. And I think it was mentioned before, I think Mike mentioned it before, that the maritime industry is a traditional industry, and obviously we have engineers on board and we have a lot of seafarers on board that have traditional ways. So there's a lot of change management, certainly when we come to putting in place digital initiatives. And a good example we have is condition-based maintenance and predictive-based maintenance. So we're now using data to look at predictive-based maintenance models and condition-based maintenance models. And now it's that sort of change management exercise to show the crew and a chief engineer that's been managing a vessel for 20 years that data can now make this decision help you make this decision. It's not replacing the chief engineer, it's enabling the chief engineer to be able to make better business decisions with factual data. So I think it's important that when we look at any of these initiatives, they are actually improving the life of the seafarers, not just doing it for the sake of doing a digital initiative. It needs to ensure that there's change management there, that there's buying, and we're actually embarking upon something that is actually improving their day-to-day life and making manual tasks that which were laborious far easier, which then enables the crew to do other tasks that are more value adding. So a good example is that we're looking at digitizing the logbooks, moving away from a manual logbook to an e-logbook. This then uses data that's already being collected in various systems on the vessel to auto-populate the e-log. So no longer do the crew have to look at doing a manual log. So we're actually making their lives easier on board. In addition, we're actually capturing data that wasn't easily captured before. It was all on logbooks, it's manual. So taking that manual data into a digital format, we get more data that we can use to start making better decisions and get a better insight and transparency to the day-to-day operations of the vessels. So that's from a work perspective. If we look at well-being of the seafarers, I think crew welfare is an important subject matter, and no more so today in COVID, where we've had issues of crew transfers and crew rotations because of travel restrictions, and some crew have had to stay out longer than maybe anticipated, and also have to be in isolations in hotel rooms for quarantine. So I think it's more important today than ever that the ability for the crew to communicate with their friends and family and to have the same amount of communication access as they would expect at home is available on the vessel. So when we've looked at deploying communication systems on board, we've tried to ensure there's a level of communication available for the crew on board for crew welfare. So they can use social media to keep in touch, use voice over IP to make phone calls to their friends and family, entertainment to give them access to videos and current affairs, news, movies, sports. I think it's, we do a lot of digital initiatives for business needs to try and improve, cut costs, to try and improve operational efficiency. But we've also ensured that we've improved the crew welfare communication needs as well, to ensure that they can access social media, they can access live TV, to ensure that their lives on board the vessel aren't so isolated as they could be. To answer the last part of that question, how are we attracting people into the industry, and how are we ensuring that the cadets that are coming on board aren't overwhelmed by digitalization and technology? And I think that's part and parcel of trying to actually promote the industry. The maritime industry is an exciting industry to work for. I've been in maritime industry since I've left education, so for nearly 20 years. But it's also been seen as quite a traditional industry. I fell into the IT sphere of it very early on. But it's also to show that, using digital now and what the skill sets that we do need to come on board. Yes, we still need engineers to be able to do the mechanics of the vessel, but we also need they also need to be open to using data and platforms that aid and assist their day-to-day operations, to see the value in data, use and trust the data and systems to day-to-day to ensure their day-to-day job is done correctly.
That makes perfect sense, and it's worth pointing out as well. Actually, that tomorrow there is a dedicated webinar on crew welfare and training as well. So that's worth tuning into. Mark, on this question of skills, when you invest in a company, I imagine most of the time you're investing for growth, and that means hiring the right skills and attracting the right skills to an industry that perhaps has a perception of that it's not very exciting, which I and I think everyone on the panel would disagree with. How do you go about attracting the right people to, or helping your portfolio companies attract the right people to the industry?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very good question. And I think, unfortunately, well, fortunately, in a bad situation, COVID has actually helped to shine the light onto the supply chain logistics industry and the importance of the industry, right? While prior to COVID, yes, there was data analytics and AI that was really, emerging. But now there's a importance of, there's a realization of the those going to school and coming out of school that supply chain industry, supply chain logistics industry is an exciting industry. There's a lot of changes going on, and maritime is part of that, right? If you wear the hat of the consumer, and if you look at the mega trends that has moved over the past couple of years, right? E-commerce is definitely one of those, right? E-commerce, B2C, and it was obvious to a consumer, but now because of COVID, because of transportation capacity problems, overland, oversea lanes, there is a greater realization from those going into school and coming out of school, right? That this industry is undergoing a change. So I think it's slightly easier to attract fresh graduates into maritime and logistics from a technology perspective than it was before. That's the first point. The second point is that where e-commerce and B2B sort of led technologies when it comes to AI and analytics, predictions, and stuff like that, that is starting to flow backwards into the B2B space as well, right? So you see, ML being more applied into B2B segment, where previously it was very much a B2C type of capability as well, right? A lot of analytics capabilities were B2C. Think Amazon, right? Consumer predictions, baskets, that kind of stuff. Those were very B2C related analytics areas, but the core components of those are now being applied into the B2B supply chain logistics segments, right? So the industry is growing up, digitization is happening, and technologies are becoming more mature, especially in terms of realizing what kind of new technologies or old technologies are now even more applicable in this space, right? So that's really starting to really hit home right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess I hadn't really considered that COVID is probably a great advert for the supply chain and for the maritime industry as an extension of that to anyone thinking of getting an exciting high-tech career, because that's definitely what it is. Mark, while I've got you, there's a final audience question I'd like to ask as we start to wrap things up. Data analytics is based on previous data and hence is a lag indicator. How can data analytics to be made to be more of a lead indicator for future scenarios? Thank you to Karamat Ali for this question. And if I could ask you, Mark, to use that question as a basis to perhaps look ahead, in 10 years' time, what will artificial intelligence and process automation mean for the industry? And how can we use it to create leading indicators on everything?
Oh, there's a lot of questions there. I'll use some certain examples, right? So no, data analytics is not necessarily, based on previous data and lagging indicator. I'll give an example of what Chris actually mentioned around safety, right? So for example, if a ship is moving and a vessel is moving at a certain speed and a certain time of the day, right? And there's a certain sequence of activities that's happening or that individual is going to make to operate, there might be a certain probability that as he hits a certain sequence, the probability of an accident occurring is higher, right? So that is potentially a leading indicator of a safety event happening, a dangerous event happening, right? So that's one example of, data analytics not necessarily being just a lagging indicator, right? Based on certain activities, it can be a leading indicator as well. Another example is ETAs and resource planning. So certain vessels going, in the ocean, right, changes course, right, changes the speed, and there's a port congestion happening as well, right? So the estimated time of arrival for that particular vessel might change, right? So what do you do with that? Then subsequently, at the port, at the terminal itself, the resources that were previously supposed to be tied to that vessel can now be reallocated to another vessel, right? So again, it is not so much of a leading indicator, but you can use those data points as to push forward planning, right? And finally, your question around where do I see, AI and analytics heading off in industry? I see it being ingrained in almost every operation or planning or kind of element. We've seen ML being purely an analytics capability by itself, a very siloed activity. Now ML is being utilized across the digitization functions, right? From understanding data elements, right? Outlier data, that kind of a thing, to predictions, right? To correlations, etc. So ML is now being sort of ingrained into almost every single process within the technology layer in supply chain logistics. And that's really where I see AI going. It's not one major AI engine, that you need to plug stuff in and get insights out. No, it's actually ingrained in the entire chain.
Interesting. Unfortunately, we're running short on time, so I'm going to have to start to bring things to a close. What I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists if you could perhaps give us your sort of 30 seconds wrap up on where you see the industry going in over the next 10 years, and what should ship owners be doing today to help us get there. And let's start with Mike, please.
Thank you, Nick. I could agree more with what was discussed, and Mark was very indicative in specific examples. The predictions is the holy grail of any digital solution powered by artificial intelligence. We at Metis are very happy and very proud that we produce fascinating results that are highly appreciated by the shipping community. After a couple of months of getting real data, we are able to predict how much will be, for example, critical parameters on the performance of every single vessel of our customers, how much will be the fuel oil consumption until the next destination of this specific vessel, taking into account the condition of the main engine, the condition of the hull, as far as the hull fouling and propeller fouling is concerned, and taking into account the weather conditions that it will encounter in the forthcoming route. So these are the game-changing aspects of the digitalization, powered and augmented by machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies. This is the trend. This is the game-changing era that we are stepping in. And it's happening now. It's not something of the future. It's going to evolve, but it is already bringing actionable results.
Thank you, Mike. And Inga?
Yeah. Well, I think that all these opportunities and changes that we face now, we need to take a larger step together, and this is really a call to action to everyone in terms of embracing open source technologies and collaboration ways in terms of co-developing a lot of these underlying technologies that we need to just solve, so we then can focus on the value, or the value layer on top. So in Wilhelmsen, we have developed an initiative we call ShipOS, and basically it will enable edge cloud infrastructure for both developers, operators, managers to significantly reduce their cost in terms of empowering themselves with these new type of technologies. And we are happy to kind of contribute into the maritime industry as a consequence of our vision as a shaper of the maritime industry. We kind of feel that we need to take this significant and very ambitious step in terms of helping supporting these changes and transformations.
Thank you, Inge. Now is the game-changing time, and we need to take larger steps towards open source. Chris, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think open source is the way forward. And not only, I think one important factor needs to be considered is standardization as well. I think the maritime industry has not been great at standardizing protocols and data. So if you look at the container industry, they've had EDIFACT messages for years. But when we look at offshore industry, for example, there is no standardization there that exists. If you predict, or predictions say that in 2025, there's going to be 175 zettabytes worth of data being generated annually, and 60% of that will come from the enterprise. Now, if you then factor that in to our industry, we need to ensure that we're ready to capitalize on that. But in order to do so, I think it's very important that we look at standardizing some of these protocols that we have. I know Inge's mentioned it before. I think it's so important now moving forward that we don't go sail off in different directions, if we use a maritime term, but sail together and try to ensure that we work together to collaborate to ensure that we can standardize for a better good.
Yeah.
And Mark, final words from you.
I think from the industry perspective, I really see it getting more digitized, straight through processing. Through processing, more dynamic management from the shipper to the forwarder to the carrier community, right? And finally, the hope is open source and standardization will continue to happen. I think open source is easier to happen than standardization, but I think from a startup and from in perspective, as long as the industry moves forward, there's opportunities for everybody.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've overrun ever so slightly, so I will close things off there. What's really left for me is just to give you my final thoughts and also to thank our panelists. I think there's a huge amount to unpack in that session, but I would say the most important starting point is to actually have a proper business case, and that doesn't matter whether you're looking at AI, optimization, big data, whatever it may be, to start with the problem and not the technology. If you can get a reliable flow of quality data off a vessel, it's going to put you in a position to make better decisions. And ultimately down the line, that's going to get us into a place where business models can transform. And I think that's not just on the technology side, that's also on the ship operating side as well. But we do need the infrastructure in place to make it work properly. And open source, clearly based on what we've heard today, is a way forward for that. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to Mark. Thank you to Mike. Thank you to Inge. Thank you to Chris. Really insightful discussion. And of course, thank you to you at home or homework, wherever you are in the world, for watching and taking part. There are still 2 more webinars tomorrow as part of Seatrade ShipTech Middle East, one on supply chain resilience and one on crew welfare and training. So do check those out. And thank you very much for joining us this morning.